For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to this podcast on Unveiling Jesus Christ. I'm John Cassanet, and in my last podcast I finally completed my discussion of the sixth seal and Revelation chapter 7. You're probably thinking it was going to take forever to get through the sixth seal and that the second coming was going to get here before I could even finish talking about the sixth seal. Well, you know the old saying, people in the last days will say, the Lord delayeth his coming. So now you know that the Lord delayeth his coming so that I can complete my podcasts on the sixth seal. And now that I've actually finished them, we're ready for the second coming. So just to remind you of everything we've been through together, John's discussion of the sixth seal is 23 verses long, starting in Revelation 6:12. It ends with a great earthquake that brings about a dark sun, a red moon, falling stars. And in the last verse of chapter 6, it asks, who shall be able to stand? We get answers to that question by finding out that those that have the seal of the living God are those 144,000 servants who have made temple covenants and have their calling and election made sure. They are the great multitude that I spoke last about in my most recent podcasts. They are those who were in prison and entered paradise. This comes about through the work of saviors on Mount Zion and through family history work, through the performance of vicarious temple ordinances, and through missionaries working on the other side of the veil. The people in the great multitude are and will be you and I as we stay on the covenant path and faithfully enter paradise after the tribulations of mortality. Now, John takes us right up to the second coming, and we see the joy of the redeemed in the presence of God as he tabernacles with those faithful saints in celestial paradise. All this is a prelude to opening the seventh seal at the beginning of Revelation chapter 8. And that's going to be the subject of my podcast today. For the nutshell version of this podcast, you can check out section 95 in my book. Today's podcast will be an overview podcast of the seventh seal. We're going to get a good look at the forest before we begin to look at individual trees in the seventh seal. Now, I have to tell you, I'm really excited to get to the seventh seal. It's the great winding up scene. We get not only a glimpse of what's around the corner of our future, but we get to see John's vision laid out in great detail. John's description of the seventh seal is 211 verses long, that begins in Revelation chapter 8:1 and then continues through chapter 19, verse 21. Now, if you thought that the 23 verses covering the sixth seal was bad, well, I can only tell you, you ain't seen nothing yet. To put this in perspective, I started podcasting on the sixth seal on July 7th of 2024, and we just finished last week after a total of 37 podcasts. Let me do some math in my head here real quick. That's 37 podcasts to cover 23 verses. That's like 1.6 podcasts per verse. So if you've been listening faithfully, you really know what it means to endure to the end. I do realize that sometimes it might feel a little bit like we're moving at a snail's pace, and I sometimes repeat some of the content, but most of you listen to my podcast while driving or doing other things. My wife Jen is curling her hair in the morning and got her ear pods in, so I know that you're a little bit distracted. So I'm moving at a pace so that you can get the information even though you have lots of distractions or other kinds of main attractions going on around you. So the 211 verses that start in Revelation 8:1 describe both historical and future events that both explain and foretell Christ's second coming. These verses are not about the millennium. So, spoiler alert, John covers the millennium in the first 6 verses of Revelation 20. And that what you see is what you get, essentially. These 211 verses are just to get us to the second coming. Now, Monty Nyman and Robert Millett edited a book entitled Joseph Smith Translation, The Restoration of Plain and Precious Things, which makes this observation, quote, knowing that the millennium is the major event of the 7th seal, we might expect John to dwell at great length on that. But the opening of the 7th seal begins in the first verse of chapter 8. The second coming and the millennium are not seen until chapters 19 and 20. Thus, clearly, the majority of the revelation focuses on that period after the opening of the 7th seal, before the coming of Christ. Close quote. Gerald Lund has likewise said, quote, we might expect that the millennium, with its 1,000 years of peace, harmony, and righteousness, would be a major emphasis of John's vision, but such is not the case. Even if we include the binding of Satan in preparation for the millennium and the calling forth of the righteous to join Christ at the beginning of the millennium, only 6 verses describe the millennium itself. Clearly, John's major emphasis is on that tiny part of history that begins at the opening of the 7th seal and ends up with the second coming of Christ. Close quote. Based on what I've just told you, you should be able to see that a major part of John's revelation focuses on our day and, in fact, our immediate future. I'm not saying we should look for the second coming to happen tomorrow, but I want you to consider President Nelson's talk from the October 2024 General Conference to put the timing of the second coming in perspective. He said, among other things, quote, my dear brothers and sisters, do you see what is happening right before our eyes? I pray that we will not miss the majesty of this moment. The Lord is indeed hastening his work. Why are we building temples at such an unprecedented pace? Because the Lord has instructed us to do so. Close quote. My podcast of September 15, 2024 talked about the urgency of temple work in the 6th seal. Well, John foresaw all this urgency 2,000 years ago. So let me now focus on things in our immediate future as foreseen by President Nelson. He mentioned the second coming and the need for us to prepare a total of 7 times in his very brief talk from conference in October 2024. And he begins with this, quote, these blessings, and he's referring here to the many temples that have now been announced, also help us to prepare a people who will help prepare the world for the second coming of the Lord. Close quote. When I think of preparing myself and the world for the second coming, I'm not thinking about the work that I do for myself in the postmortal spirit world, or even what I might do in the postmortal spirit world for the rest of the world. Now, I'm sure that President Nelson thinks about his words very carefully. So if I am to prepare the world for the second coming, it's not something that my spirit does when I die. And if I'm doing something to prepare myself for the second coming, to me, this tells me I could live to see the second coming we're preparing for now. This is 7th seal stuff that we're about to start talking about in the book of Revelation. Now, consider this as I quote President Nelson again, who said, brothers and sisters, now is the time for you and me to prepare for the second coming of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Now is the time for us to make our discipleship our highest priority. Close quote. Perhaps you sense, as I do, that the second coming could be in our mortal future. And that's why it's so urgent that we begin to prepare and make our discipleship our highest priority. If the second coming were still decades off or hundreds of years off, I don't sense we would have the same degree of urgency as expressed here by President Nelson. This is what else he said, quote, "My dear brothers and sisters, in a coming day, Jesus Christ will return to the earth as the millennial Messiah. So today, I call upon you to rededicate your lives to Jesus Christ. I call upon you to gather scattered Israel and to prepare the world for the second coming of the Lord." Close quote. Now that particular quote was the third and fourth time that President Nelson referred to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Here comes the fifth time that he makes reference to the second coming, saying, quote, "The best is yet to come, my dear brothers and sisters, because the Savior is coming again. The best is yet to come because the Lord is hastening his work. The best is yet to come as we fully turn our hearts and our lives to Jesus Christ." Close quote. Again, do you get any sense at all that he's saying that the best of the second coming is yet to come because we'll all be dead, our trials will be past, and we will be waiting for it to happen in the post-mortal spirit world? I just don't think so. So here are President Nelson's concluding remarks. I mean, literally, the last thing that was said at the October 2024 General Conference, and it's the sixth and seventh times, respectively, that he refers to the second coming. Quote, the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. That day will be filled with joy for the righteous. Through the power of the sacred priesthood keys I hold, I declare this truth," meaning the truth he has just spoken about the second coming, "to you and to all the world." Close quote. President Nelson, in these last statements at General Conference, is actually repeating a prophecy given by Isaiah, who said the same thing in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 5, as follows: "And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it." Close quote. Now, if you'll allow me to exercise just a little bit of literary license and reword this verse from Isaiah slightly, in light of what President Nelson said and how he said it, my retranslation of Isaiah's words in a modern context would be, quote, "And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouthpiece of the Lord hath spoken it." Close quote. The mouthpiece that I'm speaking of course, is President Nelson, who's just told us 7 times about the second coming and how urgent it is that we prepare for it. The prophet of our day has messianically spoken as Isaiah did almost 800 years before Christ's first coming. Trust me when I say we won't be waiting 800 years for his second coming. We won't be waiting 80 years. It's much more likely to be something more like 80 months if I were to go out on a limb and make a little bit of a prediction. Victor L. Ludlow has said, quote, "It is unknown how quickly these events will follow in succession after the 7th seal is opened, though if the second coming of Christ is anything like the signs and events surrounding his appearance in the Americas, they could transpire within just a few years." Close quote. We're fast approaching the end of the 6th seal, as evidenced by the hastening of temple work and the spread of the gospel in our day. The second coming will occur at a very early time in the opening of the 7th seal. This we're told in Doctrine and Covenants, section 77, verse 12, which states, quote, "In the beginning of the 7,000 years will the Lord God sanctify the earth and complete the salvation of man. The sounding of the trumpets of the 7 angels are the preparing and finishing of his work in the beginning of the 7,000 years, the preparing of the way before the time of his coming." Close quote. Bruce R. McConkie said this about events in our near future, quote, in Luke's account of the abomination of desolation that took place in AD 70, we find these words of the Lord Jesus, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. So shall it be again. So shall it be shortly after the opening of the seventh seal, when all the nations of the earth are gathered at Jerusalem. Close quote. When I think of these words, I think about going to a concert. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've totally lost it. And frankly, you're right, because I can count the number of live concerts that I've been to on one hand. For example, I once went to a Roger Whittaker concert in Denver. And you're saying, Roger who? I also went to a Neil Diamond concert in Sacramento, California. So that's pretty much my repertoire of concert going. So why am I talking about concerts, and what does it have to do with what Bruce R. McConkie just said? Well, the thing that I notice, and that I know to be true of almost all concerts, before the main performance by whoever you went to watch, they have this warm-up band. Well, Elder McConkie is describing events of the second coming, including one of the last events of the Battle of Armageddon. He's talking about the abomination of desolation that is yet in our future, but has its likeness in the abomination of desolation that destroyed Jerusalem and the temple of Herod in 70 AD. He's talking about our future abomination of desolation that will occur in the last 3.5 days before the second coming. That is, before Christ sets his foot on the Mount of Olives at the second coming. These last events of Armageddon, and Armageddon itself, are the main event of the second coming, but they're preceded by a warm-up band. So as you consider events in the Middle East, are we not seeing the warm-up band at work that will ultimately lead to Armageddon? What I see in the Middle East is not Armageddon, but it sure looks a lot to me like a warm-up band for the main event, or for the concert that's going to occur at the time of the second coming, if you get my analogy. Bruce R. McConkie has cautioned us about speculating about the timing of the second coming, while at the same time giving us a key to understanding the timing of the seventh seal, when he said, quote, will he come 10 or 50 or 100 years after the opening of the seventh seal? Or will his various appearances be interspersed with the signs of the time that are reserved for that future day? Answers to these and like questions have been withheld from us and will be known only as the various events transpire. Close quote. From my perspective, I see a lot of events transpiring even as I speak. I'm at a third concert in my entire life watching the warm-up band, just waiting for the main event. I should actually say preparing for the main event as instructed by President Nelson, which we're supposed to be doing at this very moment. Now, without attempting to give a specific time as to the second coming, I will now walk you through some key events leading to it, as foreseen by John in the book of Revelation. John, coincidentally, gives more details and a better chronology of events than any other prophet, ancient or modern, and I include Joseph Smith in this group. There are many messianic prophecies by many prophets, but none compared to the level of detail given by John in the book of Revelation. So let's look at what John has given us to understand what lies in our future, and if the words and comments by President Nelson are any indication, these are things that help us understand our near future. First, when the seventh seal opens, there will be a brief silence in heaven. This is recorded in Revelation chapter 8:1. It comes immediately after the great earthquake that ends the sixth seal. Albert Barnes described this silence saying, quote, the opening of the seventh seal, Revelation 8:1. This is intended not with an immediate exhibition of the events which are to occur, as in the case of the former seals, but with a solemn silence in heaven for the space of half an hour. The reason of this silence apparently is found in the solemn nature of the events which are anticipated." Close quote. Now imagine all of the destruction and devastation that occurs as the sixth seal comes to an end. If you want to get some perspective on this, think about the hurricanes that we recently had with Helene in North Carolina and Milton in Florida, and just assume things like that and the damages that are associated with those catastrophic events occur on a global scale. Should we not expect in such circumstances a solemn season of reflection by the entire world? For those who understand the prophecies of John, the silence that he's talking about in Revelation 8:1 reflects a time for spiritual renewal and for temporal preparations, even as we await the greater judgments and cataclysms that will follow the end of the sixth seal. The half hour of silence in Revelation 8:1 is a symbolic measure of time that will be followed by deadly judgments that intensify until the second coming. Walter Scott, a Scottish historian, novelist, and theologian, as well as a missionary in the Baptist Church in the 1800s, said this: "In the interval between these two, the septenary series of judgments under the seals, the trumpets, and the vials run their course. These divine chastisements increase in severity as we pass from one series to another. The judgments are not contemporaneous but successive. The trumpets succeed the seals, and the vials follow the trumpets. Strict chronological sequence is observed. The general symbol of the previous prophecy was a seal. In the second series of judgments, it is a trumpet. In the third, it is a vial or bowl. These respective symbols impress a certain character on the events grouped under them." Close quote. Now, allow me a moment to elaborate a little bit on what Walter Scott wrote about. As to the seven seals, the seven trumpet plagues, and the seven vial plagues, Scott got it exactly right when he said that these involve successive judgments. Until the second coming, when all things pertaining to this earth and creation will be revealed, we have the seals, the trumpets, and the vials as milestone markers and guides that begin as the sixth seal comes to an end with this great earthquake and the cataclysms associated with it. Remember way back when I talked about the book with seven seals? I did that in my podcast on May 25 of 2024. The book or scroll was an opistograph, meaning it had writing on the front and back of the scroll. This we're told in Revelation 5:1, which says, quote, "And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside, sealed with seven seals." Close quote. So both sides of the book that John saw, or the scroll, is written on both sides because it was complete and filled up with lots of details. Walter Scott spoke of this explosion of information that is provided by John in the book of Revelation when the seventh seal is opened, saying, quote, "The seven sealed book or scroll seen in the open hand of Jehovah has its seals successively opened by the Lamb." 6 of the seals were broken in chapter 6. And now, in the first verse of our chapter, he opens the final one with the result that the book of God's counsels respecting the earth lies open before us. The plans, the counsels of our God regarding the vast interests of the earth, as also the means and manner by which these counsels will be effected, are no longer a secret. All are disclosed. Close quote. Fully open, the scroll described by John in Revelation chapter 5 describes the second coming from differing vantage points. Richard Draper alludes to this saying, quote, "Some commentators see the plagues of chapter 16 as additional to those in chapters 8 and 9. In this view, the plagues are seen as the fulfillment of the final trump. The reasons are primarily three in number. First, the trumpet plagues are partial, while the bowl plagues are total. Second, the trumpet plagues are viewed as a call to repentance, while the bowls leave no room for remorse. And finally, mankind is not affected but indirectly by the first four trumpets, while the bowls blast right at him. I believe that these reasons do not take into account the different focus of the two visions. The trumpets are universal, and taken in the aggregate, many people will survive, whereas the bowls are specifically directed at wickedness, which shall utterly be destroyed." Close quote. In a minute, I'm going to explain a little bit more about the connection between the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls that Brother Draper was here talking about. But all of these things will help you to understand the sequence of events that will transpire from the time of the silence in heaven until the actual second coming of Jesus Christ in Revelation 19. These are the things that are happening between chapter 8 and chapter 19. You have this series of trumpet angels followed by another series of 7 bowls or vial plagues. So based on these series of 7 events, that is 7 seals, 7 trumpet plagues, 7 vial plagues, we have a complete explanation of everything that is to transpire leading up to the second coming. The Bible Knowledge Commentary explained these 3 series of 7 images, saying, quote, "The contents of the 7 trumpets indicate that they differ from the 7 seals." W. Graham Scroggie states, "The trumpets, therefore, do not double back over all or some of the seals, but lie under the 6th seal and proceed from it." He also holds that the bowls of the wrath of God in chapter 16 do not double back over the seal and trumpet judgments. C.A. Blanchard holds the same position. The series of 3 sevens are really included in one series of 7. That is, the 7 trumpets are included under the 7th seal, and the 7 bowls are included under the 7th trumpet, so that we have in fact a single series in 3 movements. The 7th seal, accordingly, is important because it actually includes all the events from 8:1 through 19:10, close quote. Now, allow me to explain a little bit more by way of overview what we're going to see as the 7th seal opens. To understand John's chronology, you have to understand the sequence of the 7 seals, the 7 trumpet plagues, and the 7 vial plagues. We just heard about them a moment ago, but I'm going to elaborate a little bit because it's a little bit difficult to vision this when you're driving down the road at, what are you at right now? So let's talk about the 7 seals. The 7 seals were first identified in Revelation chapter 5. These are the first series of 7 events. Each seal represents 1,000 years of the earth's temporal history from the fall of Adam to the end of the temporal earth. And by that we mean to say not until you get to the millennium, but until you get to the entire end of the temporal earth when the earth dies and is resurrected. This we are told scripturally in Doctrine and Covenants, section 77, verses 6 and 7, which states, quote, "What are we to understand by the book which John saw, which was sealed on the back with 7 seals? The answer given, we are to understand that it contains the revealed will, mysteries, and the works of God, the hidden things of his economy concerning this earth during the 7,000 years of its continuance or its temporal existence." Question, what are we to understand by the 7 seals with which it was sealed? Answer, we are to understand that the first seal contains the things of the first 1,000 years, and the second also of the second 1,000 years, and so on until the 7th. Close quote. It's important to understand that the earth's temporal history goes all the way to the end of the earth after the millennium, and that John records post-millennium events in Revelation chapters 20 and 21. So those are the 7 seals of 1,000 years each. And I think most of us have an understanding and appreciation of that part of the chronology that John uses. We then come to the 7 trumpet plagues. That is to say, once the 7th and final seal is open, then guess what? We have 7 trumpet plagues. And that's why some of the earlier writers talked about this kind of continuation. That's because we've gotten through 1 through 6 seals, we get up to the 7th seal, and then shazam, we get a half hour of silence and 7 trumpet plagues that essentially are within that 7th seal. So in the 7th seal, it opens up into 7 trumpet plagues, which I refer to as trumpet plagues. The 7 trumpets are identified in Revelation chapter 8:2, saying, quote, "And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets." Close quote. This means that when the 7th seal opens, we get a symbolic half hour of silence. And by that, I mean to say there is a half hour silence. And by that, I mean to say there is a half hour of silence, but the duration is symbolic that I'll talk about later on. So after this half hour of silence, then the 7 angels begin to sound their trumpets in succession. This succession of the 7 trumpets are recorded in Revelation chapters 8 through 11. Now, Bruce R. McConkie quotes Revelation 8:2, where these trumpet angels are identified, and states, "And then the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And thus the scene is set for the recitation of the plagues and woes and sorrows that are to sweep the earth after the opening of the 7th seal." Close quote. Robert Millett also explained the symbolism of the trumpets, saying, quote, "Trumpets were used anciently to sound an alarm, signal for battle, or announce the arrival of royalty. The sounding of trumpets, therefore, symbolized heralding or announcing something highly significant. This knowledge helps to explain why the 7 angels sound trumpets as each new judgment of the 7th seal is shown forth." Close quote. Now allow me to take a moment to explain just a couple of the trees in this overview of the forest, if I may. You must understand these trees as we go along. The judgments of the 5th trumpet angel are called the first woe. So we've talked about these 7 trumpet angels. The 5th one of them is also called the first woe. The judgments of the 6th trumpet angel that follows the 5th or first woe is also called the second woe. The second woe corresponds to the physical battle of Armageddon. Finally, the judgments of the 7th trumpet correspond to the third woe. And that makes sense, right? This includes the spiritual battle of Armageddon. So we get to the end of the physical battle of Armageddon, which is the second woe. We go right into the third woe, which involves a spiritual battle of Armageddon and the end of the world. So that's a couple of trees that you really need to understand, and I'm be talking about them some more. I'll remind you about this again as we run into them, and probably again and again and again. But you have to understand these woes, because you get through essentially 4 trumpet angels in Revelation chapter 8, and then we're going to start hitting these woes, and things are going to escalate and really get ugly. After the 7 trumpet angels, we're going to have 7 vial plagues. So when we get to the 7th trumpet, which is also known as, yes, the third woe, right. We get to the 7th trumpet, which is the third woe, which includes the 7 final judgments called bowls or vials. In other words, you take that 7th trumpet or third woe, and we're going to stuff inside of it these 7 final really nasty judgments, plagues, and bad stuff that we call bowls or vials. John describes these in Revelation chapter 15 through 20. They will get us up to and through the second coming to the start of the millennium. The final details of Christ's second coming are revealed with increasing detail in Revelation chapter 15 through 19. The second coming will occur at the time of the final destruction from the seventh vial plague, of the seventh trumpet, which is the third woe, of the seventh seal. These series of 7 judgments can be graphically illustrated by what I'm now putting up on your screen if you happen to be watching this. Now, if you're riding along in your car or curling your hair, then what you have to understand is it basically depicts the 7 seals with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 seals. But when you get to that 7th, you drop down to the next line in the graph that opens with the first of 7 angels with trumpets. So the 7th seal drops down to 7 trumpets and their angels, and then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out to the 7. When you get out to that 7th trumpet angel, guess what? That's also the third woe, and we have 7 angels with bowls or vials that fall within the category of that 7th trumpet angel or third woe until you finally get out to the 7th vial plague or the 7th bowl in Revelation 15 through 19, and then all of a sudden, oh, guess what? We made it to the second coming. Congratulations. Let's all pat ourselves on the back. So here we have the numbers 3 and 7 that symbolize the completeness and perfection of all of the plagues and God's wrath that will be poured out after the opening of the 7th seal. You can check out my podcast on numerology from October 29th of 2023, where I describe the numbers 3, 7, and all the other numbers that we keep encountering here in the book of Revelation. The bottom line is that John's literary style perfectly describes God's perfect judgment leading to the second coming by couching them in these 3 series of 7 different types of plagues. So that gives you a little bit of an introduction to the 7th seal that we're going to be talking about. It's mostly dealing with kind of the organizational stuff that will help you to understand what's going on. I know it's been kind of broad, it's been a little bit brief, but I will be discussing in excruciating detail in many podcasts to come all the trees that we're going to be encountering in this forest that we call the 7th seal. Now, as we embark on this crusade, it may be helpful for you to go back and revisit my podcast from October 22nd of 2023. This was an overview podcast of the entire book of Revelation, but since John spends an inordinate amount of time talking about the 7th seal, that is 211 verses worth, this overview that I did back in October of 2023 really gives you a lot of the details that will help you understand the organization and structure so that you can put the individual trees of the 7th seal into the context of the forest. So I'm looking forward to our next podcast when we'll start to look at the individual trees, beginning with this half hour of silence from Revelation 8:1. Until then, keep in mind the words of President Nelson, who has told us to prepare for the second coming at least 7 times. Notice that's another one of those very important numbers that mean completeness. So he will help inspire us as we talk about the upcoming events that we will encounter in the 7th seal. I'll see you next time, and thanks to Jen and Kristen for helping out with all the technology stuff, and thanks for sharing. You know, people are becoming increasingly concerned and looking at the signs of the times leading to the second coming. This is where we're going to be talking about those things in our future. So I invite you to invite others to join us for these podcasts. This isn't simply an academic exercise in our study of the scriptures. John provides us with a roadmap to our future and what lies ahead of us, and that's in our very near future. So invite a friend or two to take the journey with us, starting with this overview. And I'll see you next time as we share a half hour of silence together. My podcast won't actually be silence for a half an hour. I'll be talking the whole time, and probably for more than a half an hour, and probably more that you can bear. Just keep in mind this is once again the endure to the end kind of thing. But so I'll see you next time on Unveiling Jesus Christ.